The dust swirled through Redemption's main street like angry spirits, carrying whispers of fear and accusation on the desert wind. Elena Moreau stood in the center of town, her dark hair whipping around her face as the crowd pressed closer, their eyes burning with suspicion and terror. "Witch," spat Mayor Blackwood, his weathered finger pointing at her like a loaded gun. "You brought the curse upon our children." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked into the faces of people. She had helped Mrs. Henderson, whose fever she had broken with her herbal remedies. Old Pete, whose wounded leg she had tended after the rattlesnake bite. The Johansson twins, whose whooping cough had disappeared after drinking her teas. "I saved your children," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible above the crowd's angry murmur. "When the fever took little Mary, when the cough threatened to steal the twins' breath, I was the one who sat by their bedsides through the long nights, but fear had poisoned their memories. The mysterious illness that had struck 3 children the previous week, the way they spoke of strange visions and walked in their sleep, it needed an explanation, and Elena, with her knowledge of herbs and healing that seemed too miraculous to be natural, had become their scapegoat. "Devil's work," shouted Ben Cartwright, the blacksmith. "No Christian woman knows such dark arts." From the edge of the crowd, a lone figure watched with steel-gray eyes. Jacob Thorne leaned against his horse, his jaw clenched tight as he observed the madness consuming his neighbors. The rancher had lived on the outskirts of Redemption for 15 years, and in all that time, he had never seen Elena Moreau do anything but heal and help. "Get out," Mayor Blackwood's voice cracked like a whip. "Take your cursed presence from our town and never return. If you're seen here again, there'll be no trial, just rope and a tall tree." Elena's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched her worn leather satchel, the one containing all her carefully gathered herbs and remedies. "This is my home," she pleaded. "I was born here, just like you. My mother delivered half your children. My grandmother before her. Your grandmother was a witch too," someone yelled from the back. Jacob Thorne had heard enough. He pushed through the crowd, his broad shoulders parting the sea of hatred like Moses splitting the Red Sea. When he reached Elena's side, the crowd fell silent, uncertain how to react to the respected rancher's intervention. "Elena," Jacob said quietly, his voice steady as bedrock. "Come with me." She looked up at him with eyes full of confusion and gratitude. Jacob Thorne had always been kind to her, buying her remedies when his cattle fell sick, trading beef for herbal knowledge. But she had never expected this, not when standing by her could cost him everything. "Jacob, don't," she whispered. "They'll turn on you too." His gray eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, not pity, but something deeper, something that had been growing in the shadows of their careful friendship. "Let them try." Mayor Blackwood stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "Thorne, step away from that woman. She's bewitched you." Jacob turned slowly, and when he faced the mayor, there was danger in his stance, the coiled tension of a man who had fought Apaches and lived through cattle wars. "Bewitch me?" His voice was deadly quiet. "The only spell here is the one fear has cast over all of you. Elena Moreau has done nothing but good for this town, and you're throwing her out like garbage because you need someone to blame for what you can't understand. The children," Mrs. Henderson began, "will recover." Jacob cut her off. "Children have nightmares, especially after being sick. But you'd rather destroy an innocent woman than face the truth that sometimes bad things happen, and there's no one to blame." The crowd shifted uneasily. Jacob Thorne was not a man to cross lightly. His ranch was one of the largest in the territory, and his word carried weight. But fear made people dangerous, and Elena could see it in their eyes. They would not be swayed. "I'll go," Elena said softly, placing a gentle hand on Jacob's arm. "It's not worth the fight." But Jacob shook his head. "Where will you go? Into the desert alone? Winter's coming, and there's Apache hunting parties moving through the mountains." Elena had no answer. She had nowhere to go, no family left, no friends who would risk harboring her. The world suddenly seemed vast and empty, stretching out before her like an endless grave. That's when Jacob Thorne did something that would change both their lives forever. "She'll come with me," he announced to the stunned crowd, "to my ranch. And if any of you have a problem with that, you can bring it to my door." The implications hung heavy in the desert air. For an unmarried man to take in an unmarried woman especially, one branded a witch was scandalous enough to ruin both their reputations. But Jacob's eyes never wavered from the mayor's face. Elena's heart raced. She knew what he was offering: protection, yes, but at the cost of his own standing in the community. "Jacob, you don't understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly," he said, his hand finding hers. "I understand that you're the best person I know, and I'll be damned if I let these fools drive you into the wilderness to die." Mayor Blackwood's face twisted with disgust. "Then you're both cursed, both outcasts. Don't expect any help from this town when your cattle start dying and your wells run dry." Jacob helped Elena onto his horse, his strong hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. As they rode slowly through the crowd, Elena felt the weight of their stares, heard the whispered curses and prayers. But she also felt Jacob's warmth at her back, solid and reassuring. As redemption faded behind them in the dust, Elena finally spoke. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Jacob was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because sometimes a man has to choose between what's easy and what's right. And because—" He paused, struggling with words he'd never said aloud. "Because I've been half in love with you since the day you saved my horse from that infected wound 3 years ago." Elena's breath caught in her throat. In all the darkness of this terrible day, here was a light she had never dared hope for. As they rode toward his ranch and an uncertain future, she allowed herself to lean back against his chest, drawing strength from his steady heartbeat. Behind them, the town of redemption grew smaller, but ahead lay something neither of them could have imagined: a love that would be tested by prejudice, danger, and the harsh realities of frontier life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. The Thorne Ranch spread before them like a promise of sanctuary as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Jacob's homestead was modest, but well-maintained, a sturdy log cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a barn that had weathered many seasons, and corrals where his cattle grazed peacefully in the golden evening light. Elena had ridden in silence for most of the journey, still reeling from the day's events and Jacob's unexpected confession. The warmth of his body behind her, the steady rhythm of his horse's gait, and the safety of his strong arms around her had begun to calm her racing heart. But questions swirled in her mind like dust devils. "It's not much," Jacob said as they approached the cabin, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness she'd never heard before. "But it's solid, and it's safe." Elena slipped down from the horse before he could help her, her legs unsteady after the long ride. She looked around at the peaceful setting so different from the hostile faces they'd left behind. "In town it's beautiful," she said softly, and meant it. Jacob tended to his horse while Elena stood uncertainly by the cabin's front porch. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was alone with a man she barely knew beyond their brief interactions. In town, dependent on his kindness for her very survival. The scandal of it would have been enough to destroy both their reputations. Even without the accusations of witchcraft, Elena, Jacob's voice was gentle as he approached. "I want you to know you're safe here. I don't expect anything from you. There's a spare room, and you can stay as long as you need." The kindness in his gray eyes nearly brought fresh tears to her own. "Jacob, what you did today standing up for me, it was more than I had any right to expect. But your neighbors, they'll never forgive this. You'll be an outcast too." He shrugged, leading her toward the cabin. "Been mostly an outcast anyway. Never was much for town politics and church socials. My cattle don't care what people think of me." But Elena knew it wasn't that simple. In a territory where survival often depended on community cooperation, isolation could be deadly. Jacob was sacrificing more than his reputation. He was risking his livelihood, perhaps his life. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. Hand-hewn furniture, colorful blankets that spoke of trade with Mexican artisans, and shelves lined with books, more books than Elena had expected a rancher to own. A fire crackled warmly in the stone hearth, and the smell of coffee lingered. In the air, "You read," Elena observed, running her fingers along the spines of the volumes. Jacob looked embarrassed. Winter nights get long, and I was a teacher once, before I came west. This revelation surprised her. A teacher. What made you leave? His jaw tightened slightly. The war. Lost too many students to it. Boys who should have been worried about their lessons instead of dying in Virginia cornfields. Came out here to start over. Figured cattle were less complicated than people. Elena understood that kind of pain, the weight of caring for others, of watching them suffer despite your best efforts. I'm sorry. Long time ago. He moved to the kitchen area, busying himself with preparing a simple meal. You must be hungry and tired. As if summoned by his words, exhaustion hit Elena like a physical blow. The emotional trauma of the day, combined with the fear and uncertainty, had drained her completely. She sank into a chair by the fire, her hands trembling slightly. Jacob noticed immediately. Within moments, he had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and pressed a cup of hot coffee into her hands. The simple gesture of care nearly undid her completely. Why? She whispered, the question that had been burning in her chest finally escaping. Why did you really stand up for me? You could have watched me leave and gone on with your life. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I know what it's like to be blamed for things beyond your control. Because I've watched good people destroyed by fear and ignorance. He paused, then looked directly at her. And because what I said was true, I have feelings for you, Elena. Have had them for longer than I care to admit. Elena's heart raced. In all her 26 years, no man had ever spoken to her with such honest vulnerability. The town had always seen her as strange, different, the healer woman who lived alone and knew too much about herbs and remedies. She had resigned herself to spinsterhood long ago. Jacob, she began, but he held up a hand. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know that my offer of protection comes with no strings attached. You're safe here, whether you can ever care for me or not. The firelight played across his weathered features, highlighting the strength in his jaw, the kindness in his eyes. Elena found herself really looking at him for the first time, not as the quiet rancher who occasionally bought her remedies, but as a man, a good man who had risked everything for her. I need to tell you something, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper, about what they accused me of. Jacob's expression didn't change. You don't owe me any explanations. Yes, I do. Elena set down her coffee with shaking hands. My grandmother, she did teach me things. Old knowledge, passed down through the women in our family. Herbs, yes, but other things too. Ways of reading the land, of sensing when storms were coming. She struggled for words, of knowing things I shouldn't know. Jacob leaned forward slightly, his attention complete, but non-judgmental. I'm not a witch, Elena continued, tears threatening again. But I'm not entirely normal either. Sometimes I dream things before they happen. Sometimes I can sense sickness in people before symptoms appear. And the plants, they seem to respond to me differently than they do to others. She waited for him to recoil, to order her from his home, to prove that the town's fears were justified. Instead, Jacob reached out and gently took her hand in his. Elena, he said softly, I've seen you work. I've watched you heal animals and people with a gift that goes beyond simple knowledge. If that makes you different, then thank God for the difference. This world needs more healers, not fewer. The acceptance in his voice broke something loose in Elena's chest. For the first time since her grandmother's death 5 years ago, she didn't feel completely alone. The children who got sick, she whispered, I tried to help them, but their illness, it wasn't natural. Someone poisoned them. Jacob's grip on her hand tightened. Poisoned them? How do you know? The symptoms, the way they describe their visions, I've seen it before. In my grandmother's notes, someone gave them small amounts of Jimson weed, probably in their food. Enough to cause hallucinations and strange behavior, but not enough to kill. Who would do such a thing? Jacob's voice was hard with anger. Elena met his eyes. Someone who wanted the town to turn against me. Someone who knew they could use the children's sickness to destroy me. The implications hung heavy between them. Someone in redemption had deliberately harmed children to frame Elena for witchcraft. But who and why? Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. and Elena could feel the electrical tension in the air. Her gift, whatever it was, always grew stronger before storms. "There's going to be trouble," she said quietly. "I can feel it coming." Jacob squeezed her hand. "Then we'll face it together. Whatever storm is coming, natural or otherwise, you're not alone anymore." As if summoned by her words, the sound of hoof beats echoed across the valley. Jacob was instantly alert, moving to the window to peer out into the gathering darkness. "Riders. Coming," he said grimly. 3 of them, riding hard. Elena's blood chilled. So soon? She had hoped for at least one night of peace before the consequences of Jacob's protection. "Caught up with them. Maybe I should go," she whispered. "Disappear into the mountains before they arrive. You could say I forced you to help me, that. You're innocent." "No." Jacob's voice was steel. "You're under my protection now, Elena Moreau. And I don't abandon people I care about." He moved to a gun cabinet, checking his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Besides," he added with a grim smile, "I have a feeling this isn't over. Someone wanted you gone badly enough to poison children. They're not going to stop just because you left town." Elena watched him prepare to defend her, this man who had known her for 3 years, but had never spoken more than a few dozen words to her before today. The depth of his loyalty, his courage, his simple goodness, stirred something in her heart she had thought long dead. The riders were closer now, their horses' hooves thundering across the hardpan. Elena closed her eyes and let her strange gift reach out, trying to sense their intentions. What she felt made her blood run cold. "Jacob," she whispered urgently, "they're not here to talk. Subscribe to our channel to discover what dark forces are converging on the Thorne Ranch and whether love can survive the storm that's about to break." The 3 riders emerged from the darkness like harbingers of doom, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of torches. Jacob recognized them immediately: Ben Cartwright the blacksmith, Deputy Marshal Wade Collins, and to his surprise, Dr. William Morrison, the town's physician who had always seemed reasonable, even friendly. "That's far enough," Jacob called out from his porch, rifle held ready but not yet aimed. "State your business on my land." Deputy Collins urged his horse forward, his badge glinting in the torchlight. "Jacob, we need to talk. This doesn't have to get ugly." Elena appeared at Jacob's shoulder, and he felt her tense beside him. Through their brief contact, he could sense her fear not for herself, but for him. The realization that she was worried about his safety sent a surge of protectiveness through his chest. "Talk then," Jacob replied, his voice steady, "but you'll do it from where you are." Dr. Morrison's cultured voice carried across the yard. "Jacob, you're making a terrible mistake. That woman is dangerous, more dangerous than you know. What happened to those children was just the beginning." "Funny thing about those children, Doc," Elena called out, her voice stronger than Jacob expected. "I've been thinking about their symptoms: hallucinations, sleepwalking. Violent nightmares. Sounds exactly like Jimsonweed poisoning, doesn't it?" Even in the torchlight, Jacob could see Dr. Morrison's face pale, ridiculous. "Those children had a fever, nothing more. Strange kind of fever that leaves no physical symptoms." Elena continued, stepping fully into view. "And stranger still that only 3 children were affected, 3 children whose families had been the most vocal about wanting me gone from town." Jacob felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. "You son of a bitch," he said quietly, but his words carried clearly in the still air. "You poisoned those kids. That's a serious accusation." "Thorne," Deputy Collins warned, his hand moving toward his gun, "be careful what you say." But Ben Cartwright was staring at Dr. Morrison with growing suspicion. "Doc, that true? Did you hurt those children?" "Of course not," Morrison snapped, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "I'm trying to save this town from a dangerous witch. She's corrupted Jacob's mind, can't you see it? The way he's defending her, abandoning everything decent to protect her dark arts." Elena stepped forward, and Jacob felt something change in the air around them, a subtle shift in pressure that made his skin prickle. Storm clouds gathered overhead with unnatural speed, and the wind began to howl through the valley. "You want to see dark arts, Doctor?" Elena's voice carried a power Jacob had never heard before, resonating with something ancient and primal. "Let me show you the difference between healing and harm." She raised her hands, And Jacob swore he could see energy crackling between her. Fingers not supernatural fire, but something more subtle, like heat lightning trapped in human form. The horses beneath the three men began to dance nervously. Sensing something their riders couldn't yet understand, "Elena," Jacob said softly, recognizing that she was about to cross a line. "That would change everything. You don't have to prove anything to them." But Elena's dark eyes were fixed on Dr. Morrison with laser intensity. "Tell them the truth, doctor. Tell them how you've been slowly poisoning people for months, making them sick so you could cure them and build your reputation. Tell them how you decided I was a threat to your lucrative practice and planned to frame me for witchcraft." Morrison's facade finally cracked. "You don't understand," he shouted desperately. "This territory needs order. Civilization. Your grandmother's ways. Your folk remedies, they make people think they don't need proper medical care. How many have died because they trusted your herbs over real medicine? How many have you killed with your real medicine?" Elena shot back. "Mercury treatments that poisoned more than they healed? Bloodletting that weakened patients beyond recovery? At least my herbs do no harm." The storm that had been building suddenly broke with tremendous force. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in stark black and white, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. In that otherworldly light, Elena looked less like a woman and more like some elemental force of nature. Deputy Collins raised his gun, his fear overriding his judgment. "That's enough. You're coming with us, witch." But Jacob was faster. His rifle came up smooth as silk, trained dead center on the deputy's chest. "Lower your weapon." "Wait. Now, Jacob, don't be a fool," Collins shouted over the wind. "Can't you see what she is? What she's doing? I see a woman who's been persecuted by frightened men." Jacob replied, his voice deadly calm. "And I see a doctor who poisoned children to frame her for his own crimes." Through the storm, Ben Cartwright's voice cut through the chaos. "Doc, is it true? Did you really hurt those kids?" Dr. Morrison's composure shattered completely. "They weren't supposed to get that sick. I calculated the doses carefully, just enough to cause symptoms that would implicate her. But that Johansson boy, he must have gotten a double dose somehow. And you bastard," Cartwright roared, turning his horse toward Morrison. "My nephew is one of those children." In the confusion that followed, Deputy Collins made his fatal mistake, perhaps panicked by the storm, perhaps genuinely believing Elena was some supernatural threat. He fired his pistol. The shot went wide, but Jacob's response was immediate and precise. Collins tumbled from his horse with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. His gun fell harmlessly to the muddy ground. "Next man who draws on me or Elena gets its center mass," Jacob announced, working the lever of his rifle. "Doc, you're going to write out a full confession about what you did to those children. Ben, you're going to witness it." Double quotes. Dr. Morrison looked around desperately, realizing his carefully laid plans had crumbled to dust. "You can't prove anything. My word against hers, your word against mine," Jacob corrected. "And Ben's here heard you confess. Wade there can testify too, soon as he stops bleeding." Elena moved to Jacob's side, the strange energy around her beginning to fade as the immediate danger passed. "Jacob, let me tend to the deputy's wound. Whatever he's done, I won't let him die." This simple act of mercy, more than anything else, seemed to deflate the remaining tension. Here was the woman they'd called a witch, offering to heal the man who had just tried to kill her. As Elena knelt beside the wounded deputy, applying pressure to his shoulder wound with steady, practiced hands, Ben Cartwright dismounted and grabbed Dr. Morrison by the shirt front. "You're going to write that confession, Doc, and then you're going to face justice for what you did to innocent children." An hour later, the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sweet. Dr. Morrison sat at Jacob's kitchen table, writing out his confession with shaking hands while Ben Cartwright watched over him. Deputy Collins, his wound cleaned and bandaged by Elena's skilled hands, leaned against the wall looking ashamed and confused. "I don't understand," Collins said quietly to Elena. "If you can do what you did out there, why aren't you a witch?" Elena finished cleaning her medical supplies before answering. "Because witchcraft is about harming others for personal gain. What my grandmother taught me, it's about healing, about working with natural forces instead of against them." The storm came because storms were already building. I just encouraged it a little. Jacob watched this exchange with growing admiration. Even after everything she'd been through, Elena showed patience and kindness to the man who had tried to arrest her. "The town will never accept me back," Elena said sadly. "Too much fear. Too much damage done." "Maybe that's for the best," Jacob said, moving to stand beside her. "Maybe it's time for a fresh start somewhere else." Elena looked up at him in surprise. "Somewhere else?" Jacob's weathered hands were gentle as he took hers. "I've been thinking about selling the ranch, moving further west, California, maybe, or Oregon territory. Somewhere we could start over, where no one knows about tonight. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "If you'll have me," Jacob said, his gray eyes holding hers. "I meant what I said earlier. I love you, Elena. Not because of what you can do, but because of who you are. Your courage, your compassion, your strength." He paused, vulnerability clear in his voice. "Will you marry me?" Elena's answer came not in words, but in action. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, the night seemed to shimmer with possibility. Ben Cartwright cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I reckon that's settled then. Doc here's got his confession written, and I'll make sure the town knows the truth about what really happened." As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Elena Moreau looked toward the horizon with hope instead of fear for the first time in years. Beside her, Jacob Thorne squeezed her hand gently. "Ready for that fresh start?" he asked. Elena smiled, thinking of the life they could build together far from the fear and prejudice that had nearly destroyed her, in a place where her gifts could be seen as blessings rather than curses. "With you," she said, her voice strong and sure. "I'm ready for anything." 6 months later, a letter arrived in redemption addressed to Ben Cartwright. It spoke of a successful ranch in Oregon territory, of a healer beloved by her new community, and of a love that had grown stronger with each passing day. At the bottom, in Elena's careful script, were the words, "Sometimes the greatest magic is simply finding someone who sees the best in you," and in the margin, Jacob had added, "Thank you for helping us find our way home. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. For more epic tales of love, courage, and redemption, hit that notification bell to never miss our captivating stories from the American frontier."